Color is a tool that plays a crucial role in cinematography and can be manipulated to craft a bunch of different looks. Some of these looks can be pretty heavy-handed, like the quote-unquote Mexican filter, which punches up the warmth every time the world of the story moves south of the US border. But other applications of color, like in Killers of the Flower Moon, is a bit more subtle, yet has an unconscious effect on how the story is taken in by audiences. The workflow behind this cinematography combines old school thinking with new school technology. This comes from the choice to shoot on both film and digital cameras in different situations, and by thinking about LUTs and digital color correction in terms of old photochemical techniques. So let's explain how these principles work by breaking down the cinematography in Killers of the Flower Moon. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the only platform you need to create and manage your website. Killers of the Flower Moon responds to the long discussed topic of film versus digital with why not both? This was a decision influenced by DP Rodrigo Prieto, who needed to think not only about how his choice affected the look and feel of the movie, but also how it would practically influence the way they shot it.
Part of the role of the cinematographer is to find ways so that the camera and the lighting really represent what they're feeling. What's the energy of the scene? What should it feel like? And a lot of the discussions were about that.
For scenes that featured Osage characters or took place in that world, Prieto wanted to represent color in a way that felt natural, which to him was best achieved by using a film negative with a film print. The main film he used was Kodak's 35mm 250D 5207 stock, which shot scenes that took place during the day. Because 250D can be shot at a higher ASA rating than Kodak's other daylight stock, it means that less light is needed to expose, which makes it possible to shoot both some interiors as well as exteriors on the stock. He swapped this out during Osage ritual scenes for the less sensitive 50D stock, when he wanted shots to have a tighter film grain that was less noticeable. He also sometimes used 500T when filming night interiors under tungsten light. They ran this film through Arri's newest 35mm cameras, the ARRICAM Studio and Lite, with the LT version being better for more compact rigs like Steadicam or remote headshots, and the ST version being able to record at a higher 60 FPS versus the 48 of the LT. For one extreme slow-mo sequence, they also pulled out an old ARRIFlex 435 to shoot at 150 FPS in the wide, and a digital Phantom to shoot the tighter shot at 700 FPS. A few select frames which needed to look like old archival footage were also shot on Kodak's 5222 black and white film stock. To push this newsreel look even further, without using visual effects or post-production work, they shot the film on Scorsese's own 1917 Bell & Howell 2709 camera. It needed to be hand-cranked for the motors to move the film past the gate, which meant the frame rate would change depending on how fast or slow the handle was turned. This gave the footage that unusual feeling of motion that is associated with the format. So, apart from these exceptions, if 35mm felt like the right format for most of the movie, then why did they also shoot some scenes with a digital cinema camera? This mainly came down to a technical limitation of film. The most sensitive color-negative film stock that Kodak produces is rated at 500 ASA and is balanced for tungsten light. This pales in comparison to the low light capabilities of a camera like the Sony Venice 2 that has a dual base ISO of 3200. Since certain scenes needed to be shot in the blue, the small window of light after the sun has set but before the cool ambient light disappears altogether, they needed a camera that could shoot and expose with a very small amount of natural light. Having almost 3 extra stops of sensitivity meant that the Venice could maximize the shooting window after sunset and continue to shoot scenes quite late as the natural ambience started to disappear. This was especially useful as they were shooting on Panavision T-series anamorphic lenses that have a stop of T2.3, which is not a particularly fast lens that lets in a huge amount of light, unlike faster spherical glass such as the Master Primes with their T1.3 aperture. So the Sony Venice was chosen instead of 35mm to shoot scenes that took place in low light, such as dusk scenes where they only used natural ambient light, or wide night exterior scenes. Although this traditional 35mm Kodak color film was the basis of the look, it did deviate quite a bit from there to serve the story, thanks to being combined with a more modern post-production workflow. Scorsese and Prieto did this by coming up with 4 different LUTs, which are pre-established looks that can be added on top of the footage that affect the color, saturation, and contrast. Kind of like adding a filter using consumer photo editing software. They use these different LUTs to support certain feelings at different points in the movie. Instead of creating looks based on simple color ideas and grading like warm versus cool, saturated versus desaturated, or high versus low contrast, the way that they conceptualized and implemented these LUTs in the workflow used old school concepts based on how cinematographers used to work, with selecting, processing, and color timing film before digital cinematography. But before we get into how this was achieved, I'd like to thank Squarespace for supporting this video. Squarespace is the platform I use to create and run my websites, whether that is for this channel or my own personal cinematography site. As someone who is not overly IT savvy, the reason I use Squarespace is because it's very intuitive, easy to set up, and guides you into beautiful modern design choices through their range of customizable templates that you can tweak and add your own content to. A tool I find useful are their galleries, which can host your photo or video content to show your clients or collaborators what you can do. All of these files can be uploaded through their asset library, which makes managing your content a walk in the park. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/indepthcine to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The first of the 4 looks that they created was a normal film LUT that precisely emulated Kodak 5219 color negative film stock and produced natural filmic color. This was used for early scenes with Osage characters and could be applied to the digital footage shot on the Venice or the 35mm film scans to achieve the same regular film development and print look. The second LUT, mainly used to present the European characters and world, tried to emulate the look of very early color still photography processes, such as autochrome and photochrome, which was developed in the early 1900s. Autochrome has more desaturated color than modern color negative film, with a brighter, more washed out violet hue in the skies, caused by more magenta in the blues, desaturated greens and yellows, and reds that take on an orange hue. The third LUT, used in the latter half of the film once the story gets darker and bleak, was based on a photochemical development process created by Technicolor called ANBR. This is fairly similar to bleach bypass development and creates less saturated colors across the image and increased contrast. The final look emulated 3-strip Technicolor, which has a more vividly rich saturated color with deeper punchy reds and greens, and was used for more magical experimental moments in the story, or the separate coda scene which breaks away from the main narrative timeline. Oh, and one scene also used a day for night LUT to make footage that was shot under direct sunlight during the day appear to be nighttime footage. These LUTs were created by senior colorist Ivan Lucas at Company 3, in collaboration with Prieto before production began. Once principal photography started, they would receive either raw files from the Venice, or processed and scanned digital files from the developed 35mm film. The dailies colorist would apply the appropriate LUT to the footage in baselight grading software and then proceed to do minor color correction where necessary using another old school way of working called printer lights. This copies the old method used to color time 35mm footage from the lab by only adjusting primary color and exposure variables. This could be done through software by raising or lowering the offset, which is the overall exposure of the image, increasing or decreasing the values for the red, green and blue color channels, and increasing or decreasing the cyan, yellow and magenta values. Basically, making broader adjustments to color and exposure without using more nuanced correction or masking tools. Scorsese and his editor worked with these dailies while cutting. Then, right at the end of the process, once they had the final cut, they could come in and do more nuanced tweaks to the color in the final grade, or by doing things like isolating secondary colors or adding power windows and masks. The process of subtly affecting the color will likely go unnoticed by 99% of the audience as the movie plays, which is what you want. You don't want it to be so overt and obvious that changes in color become distracting. However, if we compare these different LUTs side by side, especially the starting Kodak look and the final ANBR look, we can see that they are drastically different. The first normal film LUT is applied when the story is more comfortable about the environment and follows the practices of Osage characters. The colors feel natural, rich and real, with nice contrast, strong deep greens, and a comfortable range between the deepest blacks and brightest highlights, which shows detail in the shadows. As the story progresses and we delve into the moral darkness, desperation and corruption of the story and behavior of the characters, the color and life starts getting, literally, drained away from the image. Compare the Kodak look to the ANBR look in this frame, which is shot in a similar lighting and color environment. All that deep, lovely natural color in the greens and blues, the healthy magenta in the skin tones, has been completely sucked out and replaced by warm, very desaturated tones. Likewise, the contrast has been increased in the ANBR LUT so much that the sky is almost blowing out to a pure white, and the parts of the image in the shadows have lost almost all detail, which overall feels harsher and less natural. This circles back to Prieto's initial commentary on cinematography, that the images filmmakers create should represent the energy and feeling of the characters in the scene as the story progresses. Hope you enjoyed this video and that everyone has a great new year. Thank you to all the patrons for your continued support of the channel, as well as anyone else for engaging with the video. Otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching and goodbye.